Madison Brush just dropped a truth bomb that has Kody Brown reeling, and honestly, the fallout is absolutely devastating. The 30-year-old daughter of Kody and Janelle Brown didn't hold back when she took to Instagram with a post that cut straight to the bone. She revealed something that millions of Sister Wives fans have suspected for years but never heard confirmed in such raw, painful detail. Madison disclosed that growing up under Kody's so-called leadership in their polygamous household left her with deep psychological scars that required professional therapy to even begin healing from. The Instagram story that started this avalanche was simple but absolutely gut-wrenching. Madison wrote about the insidious damage caused by hearing her father constantly criticize her throughout her formative years. She explained how when your dad is saying negative things about you the entire time you're growing up, it teaches those lessons to you real quick. That single line captured everything wrong with Kody's parenting style. It wasn't about one dramatic blow-up or a single devastating moment. It was the constant drip, drip, drip of paternal disapproval that slowly eroded her sense of self-worth. What makes this revelation so shocking is that Madison has always been one of the more reserved Brown children when it comes to publicly calling out their father. She's focused on building her own life with her husband Caleb Brush and their 3 children. But something changed. Something pushed her to finally speak her truth, and when she did, the floodgates opened. Fans immediately rallied around her, sharing their own stories of parental emotional abuse and validating what Madison had endured for decades. The timing of this disclosure is particularly significant. It comes during season 20 of Sister Wives, when the full extent of Kody's failures as a father is being exposed episode after episode. Viewers are watching in real time as his relationships with his children crumble, and now Madison is providing the missing context. She's explaining exactly how those relationships were poisoned from the very beginning. It wasn't the divorces from Christine, Janelle, and Meri that destroyed Kody's connection to his kids. The damage was already done years earlier, during childhoods filled with criticism, neglect, and the soul-crushing realization that their father simply didn't value them the way he valued Robyn's children. Madison's willingness to go public with this information represents a turning point. She's not just speaking for herself anymore. She's speaking for her siblings who've also been damaged by Kody's toxic parenting. She's speaking for every child who grew up in a polygamous household competing for scraps of attention. And she's speaking directly to Kody himself, making it crystal clear that his version of events, his narrative about being the victim of estranged children, is complete fiction. But this was just the beginning of Madison's truth-telling journey. Madison didn't stop with that one Instagram post. She went further, peeling back layers of trauma that most people spend their entire lives trying to hide. In October 2024, she shared another deeply personal Instagram story that revealed just how serious the psychological damage from her childhood actually was. Madison acknowledged that she has a professional on her therapy team and that she has a lot to work through. Those words might seem simple, but they carry enormous weight. This isn't about occasionally feeling sad about her dad. This is about requiring sustained professional psychological intervention to process years of emotional abuse. Think about what that means. Madison is a grown woman, married with 3 kids of her own. She's built a life separate from the chaos of the Brown family, yet she still needs active therapeutic support to deal with what Kody put her through. That's the kind of damage that doesn't just fade with time or distance. It's embedded in how she views herself, how she approaches relationships, how she parents her own children. The fact that she publicly advocated for anyone from a complex family structure to seek professional help shows she understands this isn't just her problem. It's a systemic issue affecting everyone who grew up in that polygamous household. Madison's therapeutic journey became essential to her survival because the emotional infrastructure of her childhood was fundamentally unstable. Imagine growing up as the second eldest child of Janelle and Kody, watching your father divide his time, resources, and affection among multiple wives and their children. You're not just competing with siblings in your own household, you're competing with entire other families for basic parental attention. And when that limited attention finally comes your way, it arrives in the form of criticism, comparison, and constant reminders that you're somehow not measuring up to your father's impossible standards. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that Madison had to recognize, even as a child, that this wasn't about anything she did wrong. She could be perfect, obedient, helpful, loving, and it still wouldn't matter. The problem wasn't her. The problem was her father's choices about how to structure his family and where to invest his emotional energy. As Kody became increasingly devoted to Robyn Brown and her children, Madison and her siblings from Janelle's family experienced escalating neglect and emotional distance. They were being systematically replaced, and they knew it. The therapy revelation also exposes something Kody has never wanted to admit. His parenting didn't just create temporary hurt feelings that could be fixed with a phone call or a shallow apology. He inflicted lasting psychological trauma that requires professional intervention to heal. Madison needed expert help to unpack years of internalized criticism, to understand that her father's failures were not reflections of her worth, and to develop healthier patterns for her own family. That's not something you can fix with a text message asking how she's doing. And the worst part? Madison's experience wasn't even the most devastating incident in that household. The fundamental structure of Madison's childhood was designed to create pain. That's not an exaggeration. Growing up in a polygamous household meant growing up in a system where scarcity was built into every interaction, every relationship, every moment with her father. Unlike children in traditional families who might take parental presence for granted, Madison had to navigate a complex emotional landscape where her father's time, resources, and affection were systematically rationed among multiple families. She wasn't just sharing her dad with siblings, she was sharing him with entirely separate households that competed for his attention. This created an environment where love felt conditional and limited. There was never enough of Kody to go around, and Madison learned early that she had to fight for whatever scraps of attention came her way. But here's the truly damaging part. Even when she did everything right, even when she performed perfectly, it still wasn't enough to secure her father's consistent presence or approval. The system itself was rigged against her from the start. Madison watched as her father made choices about where to spend his time, which family events to attend, which children deserved his emotional investment. And increasingly, those choices favored Robyn's household. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't subtle. It was blatant, obvious, and devastating for a child trying to understand why her father seemed to prefer other children over her. She couldn't rationalize it away or blame herself into fixing it. The truth was simply that in her father's hierarchy of priorities, she ranked lower than Robyn's kids, and no amount of good behavior or achievement could change that calculation. What made this structural neglect even more psychologically damaging was that it taught Madison to normalize abandonment. She learned that fathers don't show up consistently. She learned that parental love is something you have to earn and re-earn constantly. She learned that your worth as a child is determined by factors completely outside your control, like which mother you were born to and whether your father happened to be in love with that mother at any given time. These are lessons no child should ever internalize, yet Madison had no choice but to absorb them as fundamental truths about how relationships work. The emotional competition this created among the Brown children was inevitable and heartbreaking. Madison wasn't just dealing with normal sibling rivalry, she was dealing with a system where her father's affection was a finite resource being distributed unequally, and she could see exactly who was winning and who was losing. She watched as Robyn's children received priority, protection, and consistent presence, while she and her siblings from Janelle's household were increasingly treated as afterthoughts. The message was clear. They were less valuable, less deserving, less important. This wasn't just about missed birthday parties or forgotten school events, though those certainly happened. This was about a fundamental rejection of Madison's right to have a present, engaged father, and the consequences of that rejection would become horrifyingly clear during one of the most traumatic incidents in Brown family history. There's one incident that perfectly encapsulates just how catastrophically Kody failed his children, and it involves Madison's youngest sister, Truly. According to revelations from Mykelti Brown, patrons Patreon, Truly became very, very ill and almost died from kidney failure. This wasn't a minor health scare, this was a life-threatening medical crisis that required immediate attention and parental presence. But Kody wasn't there. Instead, he made Madison and her sister Aspen manage the crisis on their own while he was preoccupied with Robyn. Let that sink in for a moment. Teenage daughters were left to handle their baby sister's medical emergency without their father. Madison and Aspen had to step into parental roles during one of the most terrifying situations a family can face, and they did it because their father simply couldn't be bothered to show up. He had other priorities. He had another household that demanded his attention. And in his twisted hierarchy of importance, being present for Robyn mattered more than being there when his daughter was fighting for her life. For Madison, witnessing this unfold must have been absolutely soul-destroying. It wasn't just about the fear of losing Truly, though that alone would be traumatic enough. It was about the brutal confirmation of everything she'd suspected her entire childhood. Her father didn't care. Not really. Not when it mattered most. He could perform concern. He could show up after the crisis passed. But in the critical moment when his children needed him desperately, he chose to be somewhere else. He chose Robyn. Again, This incident crystallized something for Madison that she probably couldn't articulate as a teenager but understands with devastating clarity now as an adult. Kody's failures weren't accidental or situational, they were systematic and intentional. He made active choices about where to invest his time and energy, and those choices consistently excluded the children from Janelle's household. When Truly was hospitalized with kidney failure, Kody had the ability to be there. He simply chose not to. He chose to leave that burden on his teenage daughters instead. The callous indifference required to abandon your children during a medical emergency is staggering. Most parents would drop everything, cancel every commitment, ignore every other obligation to be at their child's bedside. But Kody operates under a completely different set of priorities, and Madison had a front row seat to watch how those priorities played out in real time. She saw her father's true character revealed in moments of crisis, and what she saw was a man who couldn't be relied upon when his children needed him most. This wasn't an isolated incident either. It was part of a broader pattern of neglect and abandonment that Kody would later expose in devastating detail on her Patreon. And those revelations would paint an even darker picture of what life was really like growing up as Kody Brown's child. Kody Brown Padron has become the unofficial historian of Brown family dysfunction, and what she's revealed on her Patreon is absolutely devastating. She's provided extensive documentation of years and years and years of neglect and abuse and heartache and pain that cannot be erased by simple phone calls or superficial apologies. Kody isn't just sharing random grievances, she's systematically dismantling Kody's carefully constructed narrative about being a devoted father who's been unfairly rejected by his ungrateful children. According to Kody's detailed accounts, reaching out is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what real reconciliation would require. She explained that repairing these relationships would demand a consistent relationship and a consistent willingness on Kody's part to actually take accountability and to change. But here's the crushing reality she revealed. Kody doesn't have it. He doesn't care to change, and there's nothing that can help them get past what he's done. That's not anger talking. That's a daughter who has watched her father refuse to evolve for decades and has finally accepted that he never will. The most damaging revelation from Kody's Patreon directly explains the emotional destruction Madison and her siblings experienced. Kody disclosed that her dad thinks the only way to have a relationship with him is for his children to come into his world and do whatever he wants to do. That's the only way they can have a relationship with him. They have to do something for him or participate in an activity he wants to do. He doesn't care to spend time with them and get to know them. They have to get to know him. Read that again and let it sink in. Kody's version of parenting is entirely transactional and effort asymmetrical. He expects his adult children to perform emotional labor to maintain relationships with him, while he does absolutely nothing to show genuine interest in their lives, their feelings, or their well-being. It's not a two-way street, it's a one-way demand for submission and engagement on his terms only. If his children don't comply, if they don't bend to his preferences and priorities, then in Kody's mind, they're the ones failing the relationship. This explains so much about Madison's childhood trauma. She grew up in a household where love and attention were conditional upon meeting her father's expectations and serving his needs. There was no space for her to simply be herself, to have her own interests valued, or to receive unconditional parental support. Everything was about Kody. Everything centered on his comfort, his preferences, his version of what family should look like. Madison and her siblings were expected to orbit around him like planets around the sun, grateful for whatever minimal warmth occasionally came their way. Kody's revelations also exposed the specific mechanism of Kody's favoritism that made Madison's childhood even more unbearable. And when you understand who Kody actually prioritizes and why, the whole ugly picture comes into perfect focus. Kody Brown went on the Vile Files podcast and made a statement so tone-deaf, so oblivious, that it perfectly encapsulates why 13 of his 18 children want nothing to do with him. He proudly announced that he has a great relationship with 3 daughters. Sounds nice, right? Except those 3 daughters are Ariella, Brianna, and Aurora. Every single one of them lives in his household with Robyn. Every single one of them is part of the family unit he actually prioritizes. And every single one of his other daughters, including Madison, was completely erased from that statement. What makes this even more shocking is the children Kody was actively ignoring while making this claim. He had a 15-year-old daughter, Truly, living in Utah at the time of this interview. Truly was only 10 years old when the family separations occurred. She's a minor child who desperately needs her father, yet Kody didn't even acknowledge her existence when talking about his daughters. He was too busy congratulating himself for having good relationships with the children who live under his roof and have no choice but to engage with him daily. During that same podcast appearance, Kody made another staggering claim. He said that almost all of his children were adults when the divorces happened. Almost all of them. That's a complete lie, and it's a lie designed to absolve himself of responsibility for the damage his choices inflicted on his minor children. He's rewriting history in real time, pretending that his family implosion only affected grown adults who could handle it, when the truth is he abandoned multiple children who were still dependent on him for basic parental care and emotional support. For Madison and her siblings, watching their father publicly favor and prioritize Robyn's household children while dismissing and replacing them created a profound sense of rejection that goes beyond normal family conflict. They weren't simply separated from their father due to unfortunate circumstances. They were actively replaced by a new set of children who, in Kody's distorted value system, were more worthy of his time and attention because they lived in his house and engaged him on his terms. The message was unmistakable. You are disposable. They are not. This favoritism wasn't subtle or accidental. Kody made deliberate choices about which children deserved his presence, his affection, his financial support, and his emotional investment, and those choices consistently favored Robyn's children over everyone else. Madison watched this play out her entire childhood. She saw resources flow toward one household while hers was neglected. She saw her father attend events for Robyn's kids while missing milestones for his other children. She saw the double standard in real time, and it taught her a devastating lesson about her own worth in her father's eyes. But despite all this betrayal, despite all this trauma, Madison did something that shocked everyone. She opened a door that most people in her position would have slammed shut forever. During the November 30th Sister Wives episode, Madison Brush made a statement that left viewers absolutely stunned. She said she is open to reconciliation and forgiveness and closure. After everything Kody put her through, after all the neglect and criticism and abandonment, Madison was still willing to consider repairing their relationship. But before anyone mistakes this for weakness or desperation for her father's approval, she made something crystal clear. Reconciliation would require Kody to demonstrate consistent behavior before re-entering their lives. That condition changes everything. Madison isn't offering her father a free pass back into her life. She's not saying one apology or a few phone calls will fix decades of damage. She's demanding evidence of sustained change over time. She knows from years of broken promises and manipulative behavior that performative apologies mean absolutely nothing. Real reconciliation would require her father to fundamentally alter his character and his entire approach to parenting. And honestly, based on everything we've seen, that seems virtually impossible. Madison's conditional openness reveals a level of psychological sophistication that's honestly remarkable. She understands the difference between genuine transformation and temporary performance. She knows her father is capable of playing the victim, of making grand gestures when cameras are rolling, of saying whatever he thinks people want to hear. But she also knows that real change requires consistent action over extended periods. It requires accountability, self-reflection, and a willingness to acknowledge the full extent of the harm caused. And Kody has shown zero capacity for any of that. During a confessional with her husband Caleb Brush, Madison revealed the internal struggle she's facing. She admitted that you want your dad to be present. You seek reconciliation. She knows she played a role in this situation, and she's frustrated because she's still trying to avoid disappointment. That statement is absolutely heartbreaking because it shows the psychological injury she carries. She anticipates further disappointment because her father has consistently proven himself unworthy of trust. She's protecting herself from the inevitable letdown that comes from hoping Kody will finally show up as the father she deserved all along. What Madison is offering isn't really reconciliation in the traditional sense. It's more like a probationary period where Kody would have to prove he's capable of being a decent human being before she'll risk further emotional damage. She's setting boundaries that protect her well-being and the well-being of her own children. She's refusing to expose her family to Kody's toxic patterns just because he's suddenly realized that being estranged from most of his children makes him look bad on national television. The real question is whether Kody is even capable of meeting Madison's conditions. Can he demonstrate consistent, accountable behavior? Can he stop playing the victim and start taking responsibility? Based on his response to all of this, the answer seems pretty clear. Madison Brush is 30 years old now. She's married to Caleb Caleb Brush. She's a mother to 3 children, Axel, Evangeline, and Josephine. She's built an entire adult life separate from the chaos and dysfunction of the Brown family. Yet she still carries wounds from her childhood that are deep enough to require ongoing professional therapy. That's the lasting impact of Kody's parenting choices. These aren't temporary childhood disappointments that fade with time and distance. These are formative traumas that shape how Madison approaches relationships, trust, and her sense of self-worth well into adulthood. Think about what that means for her daily life. Madison is raising her own children now, and every parenting decision she makes is filtered through the lens of what she experienced growing up. She has to actively work to avoid repeating the patterns of emotional neglect and favoritism that damaged her so deeply. She has to consciously choose to show up for her kids in ways her father never showed up for her. That's exhausting emotional labor that most parents don't have to perform because they had healthy role models who demonstrated what good parenting actually looks like. Madison's willingness to seek therapy and her articulate expressions about her emotional needs suggest she's actively engaged in breaking generational patterns. She's determined not to pass this trauma down to Axel, Evangeline, and Josephine. She wants them to grow up knowing they're valued unconditionally, not because they perform well or meet arbitrary standards, but simply because they exist and they're hers. That's the kind of parent she's choosing to be, in direct opposition to the parent Kody was to her. But breaking these patterns requires constant vigilance and self-awareness. Madison has to recognize when old wounds are influencing her reactions. She has to process feelings of inadequacy that were planted decades ago by her father's constant criticism. She has to unlearn the toxic lessons about conditional love and transactional relationships that were embedded in her childhood experience, and she has to do all of this while also managing the regular challenges of parenting 3 young children and maintaining her own marriage and household. The fact that Madison continues to need therapeutic support at 30 years old is a damning indictment of Kody's parenting. He didn't just make a few mistakes or have occasional lapses in judgment. He inflicted psychological damage that has persisted for decades and will likely require ongoing management for the rest of Madison's life. That's not something you can apologize away or fix with a few superficial attempts at reconciliation. The harm is permanent, even if Madison finds ways to cope with it and build a healthier life despite it. Madison's journey represents both the devastating consequences of Kody's failures and the possibility of healing through intentional effort and professional support. She's proof that you can survive a traumatic childhood and still build something beautiful, but she's also proof that survival comes at a cost that should never have been necessary in the first place. And when confronted with all of this evidence of his failures, Kody's response has been absolutely delusional. Kody Brown's response to his children's estrangement reveals a level of delusion that's honestly staggering. He has completely reframed the entire situation to position himself as the victim of his children's cruelty, rather than understanding their distance as the natural consequence of his own abandonment and favoritism. During various confessionals and podcast interviews, he's claimed that he reaches out to every one of his children and that the responsibility for maintaining relationships lies with his children who are not reciprocating. He genuinely believes he's the one making heroic efforts while his ungrateful children refuse to appreciate him. This demonstrates that Kody has learned absolutely nothing from his failures as a father. He's incapable of self-reflection or genuine accountability. In his mind, sending occasional text messages or making performative phone calls constitutes sufficient parental effort. He expects praise and gratitude for doing the absolute bare minimum, while completely ignoring the decades of neglect, criticism, and emotional abuse that created this estrangement in the first place. He frames basic parental obligation as if it's some extraordinary act of love, deserving of recognition and reciprocation. What's particularly infuriating about Kody's response is his complete inability to understand why his children maintain distance from him. He doesn't see their boundaries as protective mechanisms against further emotional harm. He sees them as personal attacks, as betrayals, as evidence that his children are the problem. In Kody's twisted logic, he's the wounded party here. He's the one suffering from rejection. He's the one being treated unfairly. The possibility that he earned this estrangement through years of terrible parenting decisions never seems to cross his mind. Kody has also shown zero understanding of what real reconciliation would require. He thinks showing up with apologies and promises is enough. He thinks his children should immediately forgive and forget because he's suddenly decided he wants relationships with them again. He has no comprehension of the deep psychological work that would be necessary to repair the damage he caused. He doesn't understand that trust, once shattered so completely, can't be rebuilt with words alone. It requires consistent, accountable behavior demonstrated over years, not weeks or months. Madison's insistence on consistent behavior before allowing reconciliation directly challenges Kody's superficial approach. She's essentially saying that his current efforts are are worthless because they're not backed by genuine change or sustained commitment. She's refusing to accept his performance of remorse as sufficient. And that probably annoys Kody because it means he can't simply manipulate his way back into her life, the way he's manipulated situations throughout his entire existence. The disconnect between what Madison needs from her father and what Kody is capable of providing is massive and probably unbridgeable. She needs a father who takes accountability, who demonstrates empathy, who puts in consistent effort over time. He's offering blame-shifting, victim mentality, and transactional attempts at connection. Those two things will never align, which means Madison's openness to reconciliation is likely theoretical rather than practical. Kody will never meet her conditions because meeting them would require him to become a completely different person. And Madison's experience isn't unique. The statistics tell a story that's absolutely devastating. Here's the brutal truth that Kody can't escape, no matter how much he tries to rewrite history or play the victim. 13 of his 18 children want nothing to do with him. Read that again. 13 out of 18. That's not a coincidence. That's not a conspiracy among ungrateful kids who've been poisoned against their father. That's the inevitable outcome of decades of abandonment, favoritism, and emotional abuse across multiple households. When the vast majority of your children choose to cut you out of their lives, the common denominator is you. Madison's willingness to speak her truth, through Instagram posts, through confessionals on sister wives, and through her sister Mykelti's detailed Patreon accounts, has given voice to a broader narrative of parental failure that can no longer be ignored or dismissed. She represents the majority of Kody's children who have made the painful but necessary decision that the emotional cost of maintaining a relationship with him was greater than the cost of his absence. They've chosen their own peace and well-being over the fantasy of having a father who will never show up the way they need him to. This isn't just about Madison or Mykelti or any single child. This is a systemic failure across Kody's entire family structure. Children from multiple mothers raised in different households have all arrived at the same conclusion. Their father is toxic, unreliable, and incapable of providing the emotional support and consistent presence that children deserve. They've watched him favor Robyn's children, they've experienced his criticism and neglect firsthand. They've given him countless opportunities to change, and he's squandered every single one. The fact that only 5 of his children maintain relationships with him, and 3 of those are minor children living in his household who don't really have a choice, speaks volumes about his character and his parenting. He hasn't just lost 1 or 2 children to estrangement, he's lost nearly his entire family, and instead of looking inward, instead of acknowledging his role in this catastrophic failure, he blames everyone else. He blames his ex-wives for turning the children against him. He blames the children themselves for not trying hard enough. He blames the pandemic, the moves, the circumstances, anything except his own choices and behavior. Madison's journey toward healing through therapy, her conditional openness to reconciliation, and her commitment to breaking generational patterns with her own children represent a form of resilience and hope. Not hope that Kody will change because that ship has sailed and sunk, but hope that she can transcend the damage he inflicted and create something healthier for the next generation. She's living proof that you can survive a toxic parent and still build a beautiful life, even if that life doesn't include the person who was supposed to protect you from this kind of pain in the first place. So what do you think? Can Kody ever truly change and meet Madison's conditions for reconciliation, or is this estrangement permanent? Drop your thoughts below. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.